Welcome back today. This is Heather Groom, and this is High on Utah. So thanks for joining us. I'm really excited about today's guest. Nate Leavitt has been a friend of mine for a few years. And in fact, I even know a little bit of his family, one of your business partners. So we go way back. Nate is the owner of 1031 Exchange Place in Utah. Is it Murray? I think I've
We're
been.
moving to Riverton.
Yo,
New office in
okay.
Riverton, yeah.
But he does more business actually outside of Utah than in Utah. So if you're paying attention, you're in a different state and you're listening to this podcast, definitely Nate is somebody you want to talk with and know. I've called Nate about some different 1031 exchanges. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And then I actually have had people message me some questions and want to know more about REITs and DSTs. And so we're going to get into all the nerdy stuff today is what I call it.
Yeah.
Probably nerdy for me and something that, I'm having to learn about, but Nate loves this. He eats and breathes it and he's really good at it. So I'm just going to have you just kind of introduce yourself a little bit first and just kind of tell them a little bit about your background.
Perfect, yeah. So Nate Leavitt, born and raised here in Utah, and I've been in the 1031 space for in and out. Actually, I first got into it right out of high school. I don't know why I took interest, but I did. My dad was really early in the 1031 space, and I just remember having conversations over the dinner table and becoming very interested. So once I graduated high school, I got my real estate license, started working in 1031s. I'm LDS Mormon, so I went on a mission for a couple of years, and then when I came back, jumped right back into it, and spent time in the 1031 space until the Great Recession hit, and 1031s basically disappeared.
They just
for a
kind
while.
of bottomed out. I remember
Yeah,
that because I'd
yeah,
heard about them pre-meltdown and then just kind of fizzled out. And then
yeah.
when did it kind of re-emerge again?
It took a while.
It did,
took
didn't it?
years because it disappeared, and
Yeah,
so a
literally.
lot of the companies in our industry basically, I mean, you had large syndicators that raised money outside of 1031 that just kind of focused on other channels, but you had those that were focused on 1031 business, and some of them just closed their
Yeah, I
doors
was
because
gonna
there was
say.
nothing happening. And so I went and found another career and did a bunch of other stuff, and then came back. I think it's been about 7 years now, um, and jumped back into 1031. It's just a really interesting niche to be in, and I just really enjoy it. And
Yeah,
so,
because you're not on the real estate side, but you're kind of involved in real estate, right? And so
yeah,
Nate and I actually work together quite a bit because I'm doing, things on the real estate side. He's doing things on kind of that 1031 exchange side, helping my clients as well in that space. And so a lot of times we just kind of refer each other back and forth because I've used different 1031 exchange companies and I've always been a little bit surprised. I'm just going to kind of throw this out there to my audience, but a lot of times, even like when I'm closing something, like we go to title, a lot of times, like they don't have anybody in office, they don't know, or the person they have is like new. And I've
yeah,
been really shocked by that.
yeah,
And that's one reason I refer to Nate a lot because um, I had an experience once where, the person that was doing the 1031 exchange was brand new. She
hmm
didn't know much about it.
no, yeah,
And it was like a little bit scary because I was like keeping her on track and I was
yeah,
like and then I've had it with a different company as well, but I was like, "Hey, look, there's strict deadlines." And these are just to throw out some things. We're going to get into the weeds on this, but a lot of times like people don't realize like the government doesn't mess around. Like there's not a lot of flexibility. Like
hmm
what the 1031 is a gift, but at the same
it's a
time,
good way to look at it.
it's a gift is what I call it. But let me tell you, that gift gets revoked if you are not exact
Yeah,
in the
you
time
definitely want to
frames.
follow, the guidelines. And it's interesting you bring that up. Like early, pre-recession, one of the things I did, I actually called every title company in Utah and in other states. And my first round of calls was gathering information because we were developing a new program, and it was gaining understanding of how many of them offered 1031 services, and then of those that did, what the dynamic was.
Yeah, like if it's an in-house
Yeah,
out, like if are
exactly.
they contracting it?
Exactly. And
Yep,
and what I found out is about in Utah, it was about 50-50. And
I believe that. Yep.
about half of them did, half of them didn't. And of those that did, most of the time it was the title company owner that was doing
Yes.
the exchanges.
Yes.
And what we learned though is that most of them didn't want to do it.
Right.
They were just doing it because it made sense.
They
They're
had
doing it
to.
as
It
a
kind of like
convenience
fell
for
to them.
clients. Yeah, it just
Yep.
would fall in their lap type of thing.
Yep.
And so at the time we actually had developed a program to basically collab on a business with them. And so we'd actually set up a new, give them brochures if it was, we had B&D title. I think it was like in Tooele, or not Tooele, but like Duchesne or something.
Right.
And we gave them like B&D exchange, brochures to give their clients and stuff. But just to kind of fill that niche, because 1031 in general does occupy kind of an interesting space just alongside all these industries. What you do, CPA, financial advisor, it just kind of lies in the space in between where
Yes.
each industry kind of touches it.
It's so true. Because, like, even like I just was talking about my accountant on another show, and it's like we reference 1031. So it's
Yeah,
like it's kind of woven in
yeah,
into different industries and different transactions.
it is. But it's niche enough to where it's like even a CPA or a financial advisor, they'll have clients that, will do exchanges, but they don't touch it a ton to be the expert, right?
Absolutely.
And
No.
so that's where we get a lot of calls from financial advisors, CPA, and it's just a fun niche to be in because there's definitely utility to it, right? There's a benefit to it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of people that don't understand it, and there's industry professionals that still have questions, and we love being a resource to people out there. So
I love that, and he's a great resource. But we're also buddies, and I have to just throw this out there because we may reference this later. But he also is in the fly fishing world, and he's got 4 boys.
yeah.
I told him, I said I may have to get like a video of this because I think I want to try this. See, like this summer,
You
I'm
should.
like, but I'm afraid I'm gonna like hook myself, or I don't know,
We'll
but.
practice without hooks first.
Okay. Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So anyway, but a few of my clients actually know Nate. They're like, "Does the guy do some fly fishing?" I was like, "Yeah, I know he does." But
It's a
anyway,
weird bridge, man. If someone fly fishes and they find another fly fisherman, it's a or woman, it's just there's a bond there because it's just
yes,
it's a weird obsession. I think some fly fishermen, you can take any hobby seriously, but me and, past buddies, we'd always try to poke fun at it because we're like, this is pretty dumb, guys. Like we're tricking fish to eat fake food.
yeah.
That's
And
dumb.
then you catch it and you release it.
Yeah, and then you
Even
bring
better.
it in, you're like,
Yeah.
"Woohoo, that was
And I
fun."
won it, and now
Yeah,
it's gone.
and then we let it
Yeah.
go, and you're
Yeah.
like, "This is
It's
great," and
yeah.
so it's pretty stupid, but it takes you to beautiful places, and it
And
actually is fun.
and I think it would be therapeutic a bit.
Yeah,
It's just kind of like being out in nature. I'm gonna do this, okay?
let's
And
do
if
it.
I'm successful, I might be posting a few reels or
Yeah,
something
yep,
later.
yep,
But we'll go back. And I've met Nate's dad, and like he said, he's been around 1031 exchange, I think, your whole life, right? Pretty
mm,
much.
yeah,
And so, he's got a real depth there. So I wanted to start with just 1031. We're going to dive into other things as well as like REITs, DSTs. And I really want this to be beneficial to a lot of my viewers and my clients because they call me. And what I always tell people is I'm like, look, I'm amazing at getting you what you want for real estate. I am very good, very skilled, but I know enough about 1031s, just like my CPA that I also interviewed. But then Nate's the next level. Nate's like the person that you want to talk to. If you've got a scenario where you're like, okay, I don't know if I want to buy another rental property. What are my options? Because there are other options, and people, first of all, they
yeah.
don't realize that,
No,
and
no.
there's we referenced this in the last show, but like in the state of Utah, you can even buy water shares,
Yeah,
with a 1031 exchange, which people, I remember I brought that up to my accountant, and he brought it up, and he said, I had no idea you could do that,
yeah,
So 1031, there's levels of 1031. So, I think that's important to recognize even right off the bat. And then, as I mentioned with title companies, they're really great at title, right? They're
mhm,
great at the title issues. 1031 is its own niche kind of thing.
mhm,
And so, again, I've always been a little bit surprised at who's running the 1031s
mhm.
sometimes at the title company, who they outsource it to. And a lot of times that always makes me a little nervous as a realtor because I'm like, okay, do they know what they're doing? Are they on
Well,
top of it?
yeah, and clients need to know too, the process will be exactly the same.
Yes.
Because like we work nationwide, and so all the time, I have some phone numbers and Google listening things in other markets. And so sometimes, like, hey, where are you located? I'm like, we're in Salt Lake City. And they're like, oh, can we still, work with you guys? And the process is the same no matter where you or we are, because we interface directly with the title company or the closing attorney in states that use closing
Yes.
attorneys.
Yep.
And so we work directly with them so that when, you go to close, the 1031 docs are there to sign with everything else. And so at the end of the day, whether it's the title company doing it, whether it's a standalone qualified intermediary, the process will feel the same. I think a lot of people, I mean, every day talk to people, get familiar with the process or whatnot, and they typically come with a lot of anxiety because like, oh, this is
Hmm.
scary. I haven't done it before. And then when you break it down for them as far as what they need to know, a lot of times like, hey, can we set up an appointment? I'm like, I can explain to you right now in like
Yeah.
in like
Here it is.
2 minutes, and it's
Yes.
actually very simple. And so usually the goal with any call is that they leave with a lot of relief and a lot less pressure than
Yes.
when they called, because it's like, hey, all we need from you is the contract and contact information for your title company. That's it.
Yep.
We'll take it from there.
We know
Docs will
what
be
we're
there at
doing.
closing.
Yep.
That's all you got to do. And there's like, oh
And
wow.
I can't tell you how many times I've had clients that have even said to me, "Okay, well, what else am I supposed to be doing?"
That's
Like,
it.
and I'm like, "Nothing. Like, we
And
have
we'll
you.
walk
We've
them
got you."
through. Yeah, because I
Because
mean,
I'm watching the dates as well.
yeah.
Nate's watching the dates. Like, we know what we're doing on that. And I use a 1031 exchange often on my properties, just when I'm reinvesting in different things. And then, like I said, there's also different layers, which we're going to probably have to have Nate on again to talk about other kind of like 1031 part two,
Sure.
and some other interesting pieces. But so maybe just start with that. Like, what exactly is a 1031? Just kind of maybe roll through that real quick because I've got people that listen into my podcast that are experienced investors. Maybe they own 100 properties.
Mhm.
Then I also have some that are first time home buyers,
Yeah,
right? And I always call them actually first time investors
sure,
because their first home they're buying is their first investment.
sure.
And they need to already be like changing their mindset on that and saying, okay, this is my first of many investments. And that's the way you're going to grow wealth. That's how you're going to grow, your passive income.
Yeah.
And so maybe just kind of explain kind of the history, like briefly of 1031 exchange, what the history is, what it is, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so there's a landmark case back in the day. I actually know the gentleman that worked on it, but um, and it was a Starker exchange. It was known as a Starker exchange because of this landmark Starker case many years ago. But basically, it came about, and what people need to know at this point, the first thing that we clear up a lot, that you wouldn't think you'd have to, but is 1031 exchanges are for business or investment property.
Yep. Bingo
So
right there. Remember that. Different than capital gains, like different than your primary
yeah,
residence
yeah.
when you're selling it.
And it's usually, sometimes we actually do get it more you think, questions about when someone's selling, their home. And I'll
Yes.
even get agents that will call asking, say, hey, I got this client, and I'll listen to how they're talking about things to be like, what is this property that they're
Is it a
selling?
primary resident or not?
Exactly,
Yes.
because that's the first thing to get out. It's for business or investment property, but especially on the second end, because we get questions probably almost every day about, hey, I'm selling this property. Can I put this towards my house? Or can I put this towards my loan on my other rental property? Or
And
can I
call it
put
a
it towards,
primary.
yeah,
Yes.
or
Yep.
whatever. So it's like you're selling real property and you're buying real property. So for example, if I have another rental, I'm like, man, I'd really like to use these proceeds to pay that off. You can't do that because you're not actually
Mm,
buying real property. You would just be applying funds towards a loan, right?
that's right.
You're not
Other
acquiring
people's
anything,
money.
right?
Yep.
So that's the first thing, is it's business or investment use, and it's your intended use, right? And so there is a way to ultimately get into a primary that people will do where you can exchange into a property that you rent out for 2 years. And
Or
two
maybe it has an ADU,
Yeah.
and just to kind of also clarify right there too, some people they've kept their first home
Yeah.
and then they turn it into an investment
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
So as long as it still has been an investment property,
Yeah.
I mean, we can work with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So even if it was your primary residence at one time,
If it's
that's
your
okay
primary,
too.
you can convert it to a
That's fine.
rental, ideally for 2 years,
Exactly.
and then, you can take advantage of 1031, roll it back into investment property, And if you really, we have sometimes you'll have people that are, retirement age and they're looking at this, oh, we want to get this dream house to retirement to. So they'll go use the 1031 proceeds to buy something, rent it out for 2 years, and then move in and make it their primary.
Mhm.
And we don't provide tax advice. I always make that clear. It's again with the niche that we're
Yes.
in, we're talking about tax stuff, but we don't provide tax advice. But with that, something to make people aware of if they do plan on doing that is it's usually best if you are intending for that home to be your forever home.
Mhm.
The reason being is once you move in and you're there for 2 years and you can claim it as a primary, if you were to sell it as a primary, um, the 121 exclusion that you usually get when you sell a primary home, that does not cover depreciation recapture. So that
Mhm.
may or may not be a big deal because if you said, hey, I had this rental for 20 years, so I took 20 years of depreciation, and then I exchange that into a home that I later make my primary, you've got a bunch of depreciation recapture kind of pending, we'll say. And
Mhm.
so if you 1031, you're going to keep deferring that.
Yep.
But if you turn into a primary, that's fine. But if you were to ever sell that as a primary,
That's right.
that depreciation recapture is going to come slam you.
And it's gonna
And
hit you like a ton of bricks because
and
I
if you
have
don't
had
know
somebody.
that,
I've had somebody in
yeah,
that
that
situation.
can be scary. If you
Yes.
know and you can be like, "Hey, I really want the house and we plan to be here," then it's like, "Hey, that's fine." I never want to change people's objectives,
Oh, yeah.
but it's like
But it's planning.
you
Yeah.
need to have the right information as you're considering,
100%. I
these
always tell
decisions.
people, know the plan, like know what you want,
Yeah.
because what is it you're trying to go for? Because a lot of times people kind of do it backwards
Yeah.
and they just are in like a kind of a response type
Yeah.
situation where they're like, well, I just thought it'd be convenient and I moved in here. But I'm like, okay, when you're moving into a rental property
Yeah.
or if you're flipping,
Think about a step or two
you gotta talk
ahead.
to a few people,
Yeah, you got to think a
first.
step or two ahead. And another thing I'll just put out there, just because it's another thing that we come across a lot, is the need for what's called a drop and swap. So it's pretty common that
Yes.
people will own real estate with other individuals, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's family, friends, whoever. And it's most common that when they do that, they'll own it inside an LLC. So the LLC owns 100% of the real estate, and then they have ownership in the LLC, however that's split. The challenge with that is that when it comes time to sell, the LLC is the taxpayer. You only have one taxpayer in every exchange,
Hmm.
and the taxpayer needs to be congruent on the front and the back end. So whoever holds title on the relinquished property, the property you're selling, needs to be the one that holds title on the replacement property. So what is, can commonly happen is, okay, I went in and we bought this real estate with some friends of mine or whatever.
Yeah.
Now it's time to sell, and we want to go different ways. We have different objectives. We're looking to do different things. And what inevitably happens so many times is they'll realize when it's time to close, they have an offer, they're looking at an
Oh,
impending
yes.
closing, and they go, okay, we want to exchange. And it's like, okay, well, the LLC is the taxpayer. What's the plan, as far as that? Because you'd have to drop from the LLC. They call it a
Hmm.
drop and swap, where you drop from the LLC, where you basically quit claim deed everybody's interest out.
Hmm.
But the IRS doesn't like that
They
right
don't
before an
like it,
exchange.
right?
And so ultimately, it's best to put mileage, and best is 2 years. So it
Hmm.
takes planning. So it's something to be aware of. Anytime you own real estate with people in an LLC, there's benefits there. But when it comes time to sell, you're going to have some navigating to do. And so
And you need a little time on that
you
too. And
ideally need time.
because you don't, that's one of the things I even ask
Yeah.
people right before I list their property. If it's been an investment property, like a short term rental,
Yeah.
and a lot of people go in with like a brother or a
Hmm.
friend, and then they think, okay, I can just get to, closing and it all magically works out. And I'm like, okay, wait a second.
Yeah. We need to
So
think
I
about some of
always,
the
I
stuff.
even before I list, I'm like, who are the partners?
Hmm.
I need to know, like, show me your
And what are the
documents.
plans?
What are the plans?
What are
Like,
the
what are you
plans?
moving forward? Are you splitting? Are you doing a different property together?
Yeah.
Like, I like to have all the pieces. And then if I still have questions, I'm calling Nate and I'm like, okay, Nate, tell me about this
And it may
because
not be
it's
something that we can help
right.
with. Like, we have a great attorney that will do some of these, because sometimes it's really, especially if they're in
Exactly.
like California, you don't want
Okay.
to do a drop and
Whew.
swap right before in California, right? So
No.
it's like we have an attorney where you can also do a swap and drop, where it's like you set up some additional entities, you take time, and you
Yes.
basically drop after. So rather than before, you drop 2 years down the
That's
road.
right.
So there's different ways that you can get around if you're like, oh, shoot, we are going to close soon. It's kind of too late. There's still things you can do. there's a level of risk to everything,
Absolutely.
but the biggest thing you can do is just
Kind of have a plan,
looking
right?
ahead, have a plan.
Yes. I tell that to people. I'm like, before we even list your house, I need to know like what is the plan? What are you doing? What are you wanting to accomplish? And are you going to be partners for about 2 years?
Yeah,
Are you moving forward? Are you kind of committed that way? Because a lot of times people just think, hey, we're going to buy this house and it's going to all be great. And they don't really think of, they haven't talked to their accountant. They haven't talked to anyone else. They don't, and there's no plan. Like it's
yeah,
just a, hey, this is just something that's in front of me. And so we're
yeah.
going to do it. So such a good point. So, okay, let's go back to then the 1031. Explain kind of why we even call it a 1031. I know this answer, but I'm just wanting to make sure that people understand what exactly it is and even how did it get its name?
Yeah, it's just from the section in the IRS code. So section 1031, just like section 121 refers to the exclusion you get when you sell a primary house. So
Exactly.
so it's just referring to the IRS code.
Okay.
Um, so um, yeah,
Yeah. And then basically, so let's talk about kind of even what a 1031 is. So,
okay,
okay, someone goes in, let's say that I'm selling their I could say they're quadplex, right?
sure,
So the quadplex, then they're saying, okay, and I've always encouraged them. I'm like, a lot of times, I'm just going to throw this out there. It depends on their accountant. Accountants matter, people. Okay. Also, um, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, I just think I'm just going to cash out, or I'm going to do,
yeah,
my and that's okay. I mean, in some situations that might be good. What bothers me is when somebody, as a blanket reason, tells my clients, "Hey, it's always better to cash out." I'm like,
and when that comes
nah.
from a CPA, it's
It's
almost
so
impossible to
hard.
battle.
And
We,
CPAs always are looking out the back window. This is what I always say.
yeah,
Realtors, we're looking out the front window of the car. They're looking out the back, and a lot of them don't own real estate. And so that's
yeah.
what gets really tricky because it's such a different area. Like I always say it's like, going general practitioner versus specialist.
Hmm.
You really, if you want to be an investor, you better really get a good team behind you and you've got to be that specialist that understands this.
And use your own logic too, because sometimes, like, I tell client, like, I'm not pushy. When I will be pushy is when I see people making or about to make horrible
Bad
decisions.
decisions.
That's
Yes.
when I'll push. And sometimes, we do run into situations where they're getting advice of, a professional, and it may be a CPA, and I'll push
Or their
back,
dad or somebody.
or somebody, right?
Yes,
Or
somebody.
somebody, but sometimes it can even be. So I always tell people, it's like, look, also run this through yourself and make sure it checks
Right.
out with yourself. Don't just blindly trust, oh, they're a CPA, so I have to trust them, or my dad or whoever, because sometimes it doesn't make sense. And we'll lay that
Totally.
out and go, again, not tax advice, but let's zoom out and just look at it on a very
Totally.
general level.
Like, what are
If
your
this,
options?
and this is
Yes.
true, how could this possibly make sense? Because there is
Right.
a time and place to pay tax. There's a time where
Absolutely.
I'll tell people, you know what? I would pay the tax on this. Again,
Yes.
if it were me, you make your own decision. Here's what I would consider as I'm
I had
looking
a
at
property,
this.
you actually told me that because
Yeah.
I said, "Hey, what do you think on this?" And we kind of we kind of talked it out and I was
Talk it
like, "You know
through,
what?
weigh it out,
This one actually might make sense for me not to do a 1031 on," which it did. And
because they're kind of
then
handcuffs. Once you're
yeah.
in the 1031, you are kind of handcuffed to, like, okay, I can only buy business or investment property.
Yes.
You're limited in a lot of ways. So there is downside. 1031 isn't like all rainbows, but it opens some great opportunities. But so there's a time and place to consider, what are all my options.
And you've really got to understand the 1031 because I think even as an investor myself, even before I started doing real estate, I'd heard of 1031s. I knew they kind of fizzled out for a while. I knew kind of the basics of it. But then, about probably about 10 years ago, actually it was more than that. It was like when we were selling some of our first rental properties and I had to kind of go, "Wait a minute. What do I do here? And is this a thing still?" Because number
Mhm.
one,
Yeah, yeah.
nobody was talking about it.
Sure.
Do you
Yeah.
remember that? This was probably in like 20, let me think, 2014. So about 10 years
Yeah.
ago, 20. And it was like after we'd come out of the economic meltdown and I'd had these two homes and I was like, this is what I kind of want to do. And I remember I asked my CPA about it at the time, a different CPA. And he was like, "I don't know. I don't own real estate. I don't really I know this is a tax code," but he didn't know the like what. to it or the why behind it. And, he was like, here's what it is. Here's the general definition.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's just so important that you really understand it. And again, goals, goals, goals. And I cannot stress that enough. Like my life changed when I started to really understand what I wanted.
Yeah.
And when I said, okay, like I'm doing some things for deferring taxes or paying less in taxes, I'm also doing things for kind of like, eh, tax planning,
Hmm.
for inheritance purposes, for retirement purposes,
Hmm.
but really getting clear on that. And that's why I always say, just even call me. Like, let's
Yeah.
have a chat about it,
Yeah.
see what you're
100%.
wanting to do, because the worst thing you can do, and for anyone out there, is when you're already listing your property. I just talked to somebody 3 days ago. They'd already listed their property, and I
Hmm.
said, and it was a fractional situation.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we're all splitting up. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is a bigger thing than you think it is.
Sure.
And you need to really think about this because there's like 6 owners.
Mm.
So I'm like, this is not even just two. I'm like, okay, you're going to need to talk to somebody.
Sure.
So I love that,
I
we're
love this
stressing
topic.
this.
Yeah, I love this topic because I kind of have a round of questions whenever I talk to someone that I'll run through. And part of it is just because these are the most important things I feel like, but also because a lot of people in our industry just don't. And that's why we structured our business the way that we do. But it's like whenever I talk to someone, I want to get an understanding of their situation. And part of that is always understanding their objectives. And a lot of people surprisingly don't really
And they
understand
don't
that.
know,
They don't know
right?
their objectives. They may know maybe what their preferences are, but they may not know their objectives. And having, I love walking people through that and asking them the questions that they haven't thought of. And I'll give people homework. I'm like, hey, here's your homework
Yes.
before we talk
Hmm.
again, is to really chew on these questions because, a colleague of mine, Ralph Bungie, he used a phrase like, you need to know where you're going before you leave where you're at. And the idea is like, I'll often ask people like, what motivated the sale? What prompted the sale, right? There was some sort of, stimulus to this transaction. What was it, right? Because sometimes it'll be an unsolicited offer. Someone will come and offer on their farm or their house or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes it's like, oh, I live in Arizona now. This is in Oregon or wherever. And they're trying to simplify. And what I hear is like, oh, they're trying to simplify. And we'll talk about DSCs and all that stuff later. I know that they probably don't know what these other products are. And this is a way that they could simplify even further than they're planning. But it's like, I want to help them walk through really what they're trying to do. Okay, you want to go buy another rental. Well, why? You had one. You're selling it now. So why are you buying another? What is it that you're looking for? Oh, this one was getting older, it
Right.
required
It
more
might be,
work,
yeah,
or
renovation.
I
I don't want to do
move
the
now,
reno.
or
Yep.
or I have guys where he's like, this was an older gentleman I was talking to just recently, where he's like, I had one of my, I can't remember how many units it was, but it burnt down. And so he's like, I've just on the tail end of like rebuilding that. And that was a nightmare. And
Oh,
he's
yeah.
one of these, you'll get these older guys that I really admire that, they may be 70, 80 years old and they just don't want to let go to like manage. They like
Yes.
being in and managing stuff and whatever. But he's like, this took it out of me. And I own other units, but I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I'm going to get this thing built. It's going to be primo condition. And I just,
And you better know how much your time is worth per hour,
yeah, yeah,
because I
yeah.
literally calculated even mine last
Yeah.
year, and I had to cut certain things like that off my plate. It's like, okay, do I need to be managing that or that? No,
Yeah.
and so it's a really good point. So 1031s, and I'm really glad you touched on that too, because again, it's planning. And you don't need to know everything. You need an
No,
expert that knows everything, and that's something because I think a lot of people, we get in this do it yourself mode,
sure.
and
Yeah.
we all and we're and I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I've generaled my own house, even
Sure.
start to finish. I liked it. It was a great experience, but what was interesting is I did less real estate that year because
Mhm.
it was a total distraction. So I was like, I actually probably would have been better off even just having somebody else do that for
Sure.
me. So like I want all my clients and my audience to understand these topics or these things, at least enough to make some very good decisions. But then again, just know you don't need to study this for 100 or 200 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
the best thing to do, call Nate, talk to him, get options. And
We can
again,
save so much time
and
for
it's so
people.
that's what I was going to say is it's the time, it's the brain damage. I call
Yeah.
it the brain
And the
damage factor.
anxiety because you're out there just
Totally.
sifting through information. Because
And
I'll
you
have
don't know what's real too, by
like,
the way. I've
oh
read
yeah,
bad stuff online. I mean, I've read it
100%.
and I'm like, wait, I know that is not true about a
Yeah.
1031,
Yeah.
you know,
And they'll
and
be out there just reading and reading and reading and still feel like I've read a ton. Like even our website has a ton of good information, but it's like they'll still be like, I've read, but I still just don't know. And you'll get people that, on the flip side will be like, well, I'm gonna go do some more reading. I'm like, let's just talk because I promise a 10-minute conversation will save you hours of
hours of
your
work,
own time because
hours.
I can boil it down to really what you need to know, sift out all this other stuff, whether it's, an exchanger or an agent. It's like there's certain things that agents need to know, but it's not a ton. You don't have to know that much as an agent to do your job really well. And so it's like if you just want to like better understand, I'll talk to people all day about this stuff.
Right.
And so it's just like let me be your 1031 guy where it's like you have questions, you can text. All of our numbers receive texts. A lot of my
Yes.
clients or like agents have my cell phone. It's like just text if it's a quick question or give me a call or whatever, because it's like there's so much information out there. I can see how it could be super overwhelming, but it's just like when you have, it's all about context,
Right.
right? And so we just give context to people and then they feel a lot more capable. We're like, okay, I'm actually much more confident in my
Absolutely.
position now. I'm not like, holy cow, this is scary. They're like, okay, I have my bearings now. I know what I'm up against. I know what my options are. Now I just need to figure things out with
Yeah.
my wife or whatever and
Right.
just like make some decisions.
Well, and I always tell people, I'm like, you need the information to make an educated decision, but
Yeah.
you do not need to, confuse yourself even more because a
No.
lot of my clients will be like, I did a deep dive this weekend and I'm even more confused than
Yeah.
ever on what I can transfer into, what I can't, how to do that, and like I said, some people make these assumptions. They're like, oh, I didn't do a 1031, but I'm just going to do a back 1031. I'm like, okay, wait a
Yeah.
minute. Not all of the things you're reading on there are right and true. So, kind of moving forward, basics of 1031, like we said, it's the tax code, and it basically defers. Again, it's not your
Doesn't go
taxes
away.
disappear forever.
No.
We call it you're kicking it down the road or procrastinating it, but procrastinating it in a good way.
And you can do
And
it
there's
indefinitely.
advantages, and
And
it's
you can do it
indefinitely.
and you can do it
Absolutely.
indefinitely. So there's a term in our we always get a chuckle out of people, but there's a phrase in our industry, swap till you drop.
I love it. I
And
love that. I'm going to use that.
so it's like because some people will be under, that premise where it's like, well, I'm just kicking the can down the road. Tax rates will probably go up. I'm probably better off paying it now. But that's typically because they're not aware of the step up in basis they'll get when they die. So most people are on the path to swap till you drop, where you basically each time you 1031, you're just kicking the can. But those are the handcuffs, right? Because once you break that chain, it's a bigger and bigger tax liability.
Right.
So you can keep kicking the can down the road, but ultimately, when you pass, your heirs, whoever it may be, will inherit your real estate at a stepped up basis, meaning your tax liability is the difference between your basis and essentially your sales price.
Right.
So you're going to pay tax on this. So when you die, the basis resets to here.
And
So if
that is so important to mention, and
yeah,
we've touched on that in other episodes, but that is one reason that it's amazing for even just kind of your planning, right? I mean, your kind of for what you're doing for your kids or your family, your friends, and
yes,
whatever. However, your people don't think about their assets and the tax consequences
yes,
for their kids, and this is so important because I've just seen an example even, and people think that they've organized things well. Sometimes they haven't. First of all, I see everything. So I see
yeah.
some that have had like they maybe are inheriting
Yeah, they'll
several
gift while they're
properties.
alive,
Yes, and they give it when they're alive,
and then
and
they inherit their
oh,
basis. So it's like, again, if you were not tax advice, but if you gift
yes.
real estate while you're alive, they inherit your basis. So if this property's been in the family forever and your cost basis is almost
Let's just say
nothing
it's
or
two
nothing,
hundred
that's
thousand.
200,000. It's
This
now
is now
worth
800.
800,000. If you were to pass that when you die, your basis resets to 800. So if they were to sell it, there's no capital gain to be taxed. Whereas if you gift it to them, they inherit that
They
$200,000
inherit it.
basis. So
Yep.
now they very much need to do an exchange,
Or else
which
they're in trouble because
they're in
I've seen
trouble
that
and
before.
and they don't want to because I'll tell you the next generation
That's right.
almost every single time they want the money.
Yes.
They don't want the asset, they don't want the cash flow, they want the money
They try to
now.
cash out.
They want to
Yep.
cash out. And so if
And
they
the government says, thank you very much for giving me 20%
yeah,
of that. And,
yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yes, but I mean, so there are things with the 1031. But again, I've done 1031 exchanges several times, multiple times. I do them often. I have clients that do them often. I'm always surprised at even how many people don't know. They've heard the term
Yeah.
before. Somebody was like, "What's the difference between a 501(c)(3) and a 1031?" I was like, "It's tax code,
It's fine.
totally two different things."
Yeah.
you know. But it's just important. Again, plan, plan, plan. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, I want to be your realtor for life, in that I want to help you. It's not a transactional thing for me. It's not a one-time thing. Like, I want to take care of people, because I feel like if I would have had a few other mentors in my life earlier in real estate, I would have been able to even do just so much more. But I was afraid to ask. I was
Sure.
like, "Oh, I don't have enough assets to even talk to people that know."
Sure.
And so I just want to really stress that, is that definitely come to us, come to Nate, come to me. But so basically, we've talked about that. So that's one of the advantages of the 1031, is even with, how you're leaving properties for inheritance. But we're going to kind of go down another path real quick too, because I do have some of my clients, as they're getting older,
Mhm.
and we call them, what do we call them? The exhausted
Yeah.
landlords, or
Burnt out
the burnt
landlords.
out landlords.
Yep.
And they're like, and so sometimes I just say, "Hey, but get a property manager." So that's like one option that they have. I'm like, just so you just don't have the brain dead activities of what happens being a landlord, because I know from personal experience. But a lot of times, like, there's some that they're just like, I don't know what else are my options." Like, they just don't
Yeah.
even know. They think that the only option is cash out or do another 1031 exchange.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to hit on a few other things. And in Utah, every state, again, has different kind of allowances and things, but you really want to understand your state, what you can do, and what your options are. And so let's talk about, like, burnt out landlords. What are some options for
Yeah.
them?
No, that's our bread and butter, because this dynamic has been playing out for decades. And so, especially as you have this baby boomer generation that owns so much real estate,
And they don't know what to do with it right now. And
they
by
don't
the
know what
way,
to do.
some of them are handing their properties earlier in life, and I'm like,
And some of them are
don't
hanging
wait.
on. I know definitively there are
Yes.
so many of these, property owners that are holding them longer than they would because they don't know what to
They
do.
don't know what their options.
So agents
Absolutely.
agents could go out and find listings because, I mean, you'll get these guys that like that game, like managing, they like to stay engaged, but there's a huge population. If they're 65 and older and they own rentals, chances are they're getting to that point if they're not there already.
Right.
And they want to transition, but they just don't know what's out there. And so that's really what we've been focused on since my dad started in '97, is just that dynamic. And it's very interesting space because just like 1031, it's even a couple steps more niche because
Mhm.
there's a lot of people out there utilizing 1031s, and you don't know about a 1031 until hopefully you find out at the right time, and you need it. But these passive products like the DST or the TIC, um, they're even more so because, again, you're not going to know about them until you get to that stage and you're starting to look around and go, okay, what else is there? And then you maybe hopefully come across it, but most people still don't. So we just term, collectively, passive 1031 investments or alternative 1031 investments, because they're not your typical, I'm going to go buy another, duplex or a townhome
Mhm.
or whatever it is. These are some of the atypical types. So the industry really started back in the late '90s with TICs, or we call them TICs, which is
Ticks.
short
Yep.
for tenants in common. And so this was really and this, in combination with 1031s, this blew up through the early 2000s, because for the first time, you were taking assets that an individual investor wouldn't be able to get into a lot of times, right? If I have a property for 200,000, three
Mhm.
hundred thousand, I wouldn't be able to go get some of the benefits that come with these other investment types. And so we'll just use triple net lease as an example. So for those that aren't familiar with the triple net lease, um, you're taking a property where it's innately passive because of the lease structure. And so historically, because my clients are predominantly baby boomers, I'd use Walgreens because everyone's familiar with
Yes.
Walgreens. So that's the example I give. So you can think of a Walgreens just like your rental property where you have Joe Brown, his wife, as your tenant. The difference is you have Walgreens as your tenant. And the benefit is the lease is structured in a way where it's long term, right? The initial term is 10 years, 15,
Right.
20 even, right? We're in due diligence right now on a deal. It's a 20-year initial term. And the lease is structured so the tenant pays the taxes, insurance, upkeep of the building. So when you own something like a Walgreens, you basically just get your rent check each month, right? So it's innately very passive. So what the tenants in common did, which is tenants in common is just a form of ownership structure, right? So you can be, joint tenants with your
Right.
wife or tenants in common. Tenants in common is such to where each individual owner, they own their portion independent of the rest. So if let's just keep the math simple and let's say you have a property that's worth $1 million and you have tenants in common, you could go in at any amount, but we'll just keep it even and say, hey, here's a $100,000 slice of this $1 million property. And so when you own that $100,000 slice, you still get a warranty deed, just as you would if you bought the property as a whole. You still get your share of the depreciation. You still enjoy essentially all the same rights and benefits as a sole owner, but as a fractional deeded owner of the property. And so what that did is you could take this Walgreens and you could go match it with this person that's selling, a property for 200,000 and say, "Hey, now you can get an investment grade tenant and a long-term lease where you're just getting mailbox money and you
Yep.
don't have to do anything." So it's even more passive than a property manager because even if you have a property manager on a noisy property, they're still going to contact you time to time with decisions to make, right?
Yeah.
Hey, there's this happened. How do
Hey,
you
we
want to
got to
handle
replace
it?
your heater.
This or
Do it's
that.
your roof is up.
The roof's
Yep.
up or this maintenance or the tenant's moving out or whatever. There's still decisions to make. So it's a step or two more passive,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still decisions to make. When you have a tenant like that where the roof's leaking, something like that, the tenant takes care of it. The property manager doesn't ever even hear about it. So it's just essentially mailbox money. So that's Tix blew up because it was kind of the first of its kind, right? And it especially blew up after 2002 because the IRS basically came out and said, hey, Tix can qualify as a replacement for property for 1031 exchanges as long as they follow these certain
There's
steps.
guidelines,
There's
right?
more guidelines. So it's kind of the Wild West before that. There's still a lot of ticks being done, but in 2002, that really solidified things and
And I feel
it
like
blew up.
those were taking off, and then the meltdown happened.
Yes,
And
it
then,
blew up.
just like we were saying, it took a while for 1031 exchanges to come back.
Hmm.
It was almost just like I remember even asking like my accountant, I was like, "Is 1031 exchange even still around?"
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, "Nobody's talking about
It was a
it.
ghost
Nothing."
town.
It was a ghost town,
Yeah,
totally. And I feel like same thing with ticks. And I think ticks also got a little bit of like a bad name because I feel
they
like
did.
it was picking up right when the meltdown kind of
Hmm.
happened. So people just felt like they were like, "Oh, ticks are inherently terrible," or
Yeah,
something.
because you had tick deals go bad.
And there were tick deals that did go bad.
They definitely were, and there are a lot of companies and
Yes,
investors that were hurt, and these deals inevitably had debt on them, and some of them
right.
highly leveraged. And so when you had these deals with a lot of debt, now you have the additional, component of these individual, these additional owners, it gets complicated. So there's a lot of ugliness. Our niche that we always did with our TICS deals have been debt free.
And that's important. So I really want to be clear on that because that is I I am a what I call a conservative investor.
Yeah,
I'm like an investor. I'm aggressive enough in the strategy. I'm very aggressive in certain areas, but I'm not one of those that just throws money at
yeah,
something without the knowledge behind it.
me
It's
too.
like I really like to dive in deep. I like to kind of say, is this like for example, I do a lot with equity plays, as you know.
Mhm.
So I do a lot where it's like sometimes I'm doing a 1031 because I'm like, hey, I already know that this property is 100,000 under value.
Mhm.
I know that in 2 years with the demand that I can flip it, right? So there's sometimes different reasons you buy. Sometimes it's
Sure.
for the rental
Yeah.
income per month. Sometimes, like you said, mailbox money, whatever it might be. So there's different strategies for different reasons.
Mhm.
But I feel like ticks kind of got this bad reputation all of a sudden. It kind of got mixed in with just these economic factors.
Mhm.
But it wasn't because, it was basically just, a bad time, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it was
it's just like anything else. It's like, "Oh, I lost a bunch of money in the stock market," right? It doesn't mean the stock market's bad, right?
exactly
There were definitely deals that were bad deals,
for sure.
100%. But it's like through the recession, we didn't get a single call about our deals that we did. because we always played to the conservative side, because even back then, most TICs were leveraged. The
That's right.
vast
And they were
majority.
leveraged heavily
A
too.
lot of
I
them were
want to
heavily
really
leveraged,
put in
and
there.
ours were debt free, because the way that we look at it, what people, and we can get into this because it's something people need to understand, is that a lot of people at that stage, they don't need debt in their exchange, right?
Mm-mm.
They're selling the property, it's paid off. So at that stage, you're 65, 70 years old. Why would you want to take on new debt at that stage? And so we're like, this is what people should be doing if they don't need debt, is debt free, and just cash flowing off that. It removes so much of the risk
So
off the
yours
table.
are debt
Debt
free.
free.
That is so, I mean, I knew that, but I needed to kind of even remind myself
Yeah.
of that, which is so cool because I can tell you I don't see that all the time. And
No,
so
no.
that is pretty rare. And so for my tired landlords that are getting older, this is like such a great option for
Yeah.
them. And I know Nate well enough to tell you that I know he does his research. I think with ticks kind of back in 2007, some of them were just throwing money, right? Like, and they were just like, it
It
was
was
purely speculative.
gangbusters.
And it was, I mean, I saw a lot of things that were going on. I kind of was like, oh, this market is not sustainable. What's different in this market? Because I always get that question, right? People always ask me, oh, but is the market going to crash? Usually it's I love my CPA clients, but they know who they are. They're always like, really asking me
Sure,
all that
sure.
question all the time. Like, here's the thing, and I can actually show you on like a spreadsheet. I can show you the data. Like, we have not been building at a fast enough rate, especially in Utah.
Yeah,
Like, we are in a hot, high growth market.
yeah.
Like, you look at, we're still having babies, a lot
We're
of
still at
babies
a
out
huge
here in Utah,
deficit. Yeah.
and we are still in a deficit. And I know this is kind of crazy. This is a little bit of a tangent, but like, we're in a deficit of even luxury properties. What people are
Mhm,
not talking about is that, like, I get buyers from California coming
mhm.
over, from other states, East Coast, and they come. We have not been building those. We've been just doing kind of custom build to
Yeah,
suit.
yeah,
We are so far behind in that area.
yeah,
Like, we've been building more condos and townhomes, which are great, and those are now the new starter home, right,
yeah.
for a lot of people. And that's just what it is. But if you actually look at the growth and what we're doing,
We
like,
need a
we're
lot
still
more
in a
of
deficit.
everything.
And but I have
By a
other,
lot.
yeah, by a lot. And I have friends that are in other markets. I network with a lot of top producers in all markets. That's why I always tell people, call me even if you're in a different market, because I know the best of the best in your market. But I have friends in other markets that they're struggling because they're like, hey, we're not on a projection.
Mhm,
We're losing population.
yeah.
And so that's important to note. But again, what I love about what Nate's products are is that the debt free is key. And again, there's so much less risk in that.
Yeah,
And so Tick's kind of got this like bad kind of reputation, I feel
sure.
like. Because I remember even somebody was like, whatever you do, don't put money in a
Yeah,
tick.
100%. We run into that stuff all the time, and really, if you can bend their ear, and sometimes they made up their mind, and
Yeah.
that
And
happens, and that's,
it's what it is.
but if you can get a conversation, you go, okay, let's review the past, because I'm not afraid. I was there, and
Yep.
I know what it was like, and you just lay out the facts of the deal, and you go, okay, if we're talking risk, it's real estate. There's always going to be an element of
Right.
risk. Period.
But
I can't take
triple
that
net
away.
is like pretty safe. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, if you look at it, it's like now we're doing a lot more like urgent cares, and we were like veterinary, really strong spaces. And let's take an urgent care. We did a deal a little bit ago where in that community, no doctor was taking new clients. They were already at capacity. And so this was an urgent slash primary care center. And so you take something like that, it's owned free and clear. They've signed a lease for X amount of years. Your return is based on that lease, who's backed by a company with 200 locations, call it, right?
and
And
kids are
so,
still breaking arms, by the way.
yeah,
No
so it's
matter
like,
what
so
economic
they could
times it
file for
is.
bankruptcy, right? They
Right.
could file for
Sure.
bankruptcy and go out. That's
Sure.
that's possible. At the end of the day, you guys own the real estate outright. So if they were to file bankruptcy, you can find a new tenant. You're not losing the investment.
That's
The
right.
investment's there, you have deeded interest. It's not going anywhere. The risk is losing that tenant. And so what conditions would that, how could that come about? And so really, if you lay that out and if they're open to listening, you're like, yes, there's risk, but are you comfortable with this level of risk? And a lot of time the answer is
Well, and
yes,
there's
because
risk
you're
in the
like,
stock market.
yeah,
There's risk in anything. Like the thing is, the hard part, and I just am going to throw this out there because I will once in a while get clients that they have been just keeping all their cash in the bank,
sure.
thinking that they're going to, that's going to be a great thing. And I'm actually showing them. I remember was it 2000, I think it was 23, I said, here's the thing. You lost 8% this year.
Yeah.
Do you realize just by keeping all of your
Yeah.
cash in the bank, you lost 8%? So you didn't even break even.
Yeah.
You actually lost money. Like,
And there's better way. I mean, there's ways it's like, hey, because a lot of time the idea is like, well, what if I need this? Like we get that a lot.
that's right.
We'll
What
get
if I
asked,
need it in 2 years
what if I
or
need
something?
liquidity? What if there's a medical thing or this or that? And speaking of like what you guys do, it's like, look, if you got a bunch of cash sitting there, you could go put it in a rental or something like that, get cash flow. If you need money, tap a loan on it. Get a
Get
HELOC
a
that you can
HELOC.
tap at
I have
any
a HELOC
point.
on 2 of my investment properties.
Exactly. And you have instant cash that you can get, and you could probably still cash flow positively even with a
Absolutely.
balance on the HELOC. So it's like you can get that cash out in emergency, which it's really a comfort thing. I mean, hopefully those emergencies aren't
Mhm.
happening all the time. You don't never need to tap it, but then
But
you're
you
not
can
losing
still
out on
even
the equity
and
growth, the
you
cash
can
flow.
exit. What people
Yeah.
don't realize is there still are exit plans. You again
Yeah.
need to plan ahead,
Yeah.
right? And sure, the unexpected happens, but that's why you have insurance.
Yeah.
That's why I always have a HELOC
Hmm.
on several of my properties,
Yep.
and because I want to be able to get that cash back. Because I can't tell you how many times I have somebody that basically says, "Oh, I think I'm going to have to refinance." Of course, the bank's going to give them a second mortgage at a much higher rate.
Hmm.
So you're better off, like if let's say that you lose your job, if you've got a HELOC on that property, you're already there. You're
Hmm.
fine.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about that problem later when you're in it, you're not going to be okay. You're
Yeah.
not even going to be able to get a refinance. And
Yeah.
so, it's just an interesting kind of again, kind of it's that outlook and that planning. But going back to ticks, like ticks really, I think, had that bad name, but now I think people are starting to look at it. And of course, there's risk, like you said, but when it's debt free, when it's kind of triple net, I mean, like you said, like an Instacare, right?
Yeah.
Like people are going to have health problems no matter what the economy. That doesn't go around the economy.
Yeah.
If anything, they probably have more health problems actually in a bad economy,
Sure.
just because they're under stress and things like that. But so ticks are a really interesting option.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of my clients, once they get in, they kind of go, "What's the catch?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"There's none." Like
Yeah, I mean, we'll
this is it.
explain that front to back.
Yes.
And if you're talking to the right person, we do get that sometime where there's skepticism because it sounds like the too good to be true.
Right.
And part of that's because it's like, well, it's literally just the answer to your predicament. Like ticks came about to solve
To solve
your
that
exact
problem,
thing.
your exact
And
issue.
so they're
Yes.
not perfect, but they align with a lot of people's scenarios. Because there's no perfect investment. They all have, ticks have their Achilles heels, DSTs have the Achilles heels. But at the end of the day, for most people in that situation, especially if they want to swap till they drop, well, it's like you're either in active management, maybe hire a manager or whatever, or we see people transition to these and then they ride these out the rest of their days.
Yep.
And they just ride the cash flow out, and that's kind of the plan because it's like, hey, I grew and appreciated my assets, and now I just want cash flow. I
Yep.
want to chill and spend time with grandkids or whatever it is. And they transition to ticks and DSTs. They ride that out for the rest of their days. And that's kind of where we're at in the life cycle.
I love it.
I do want to talk about one thing that I think is, and that'll transition kind of in the DST side, because this is probably the biggest point of confusion that we see hands down when it comes to exchanges is the aspect of debt. So when you do a 1031 exchange, you need to buy equal or greater to what you sold. And a lot of people will still understand that, but not understand it. They'll read it, they'll see it, and they think they get it. It's probably every day I talk to someone that is under the premise that they're just going to take the equity, and they'll give you little tidbits about how they talk about their situation. It's like, oh, I have but they'll say, okay, I'm selling this home for $500,000, and I have 250,000 of equity, and I'm paying off a mortgage balance of 250. A lot of people think they just can place the 250 and they're good. But that is not the case. They need to basically buy equal or greater. So if they sold for 500, I just tell them for simplicity's sake, buy something for 500. Yes, you can back out commissions, closing costs, so maybe it's 480, 490, whatever it is. But more or less your sales price, you got to buy equal or greater to that. So that's something that everybody needs to understand.
I'm glad you actually brought that up
Yeah.
because I was confused about that
Yeah.
for a few years. And I think, when I have people that will talk to me about it, I'm like, look, it's equal or greater. And then,
Yes.
can you buy land? I just want you to kind of.
You could definitely buy land.
Yep.
You can buy anything that you intend to hold for business or investment. So that's another common point of confusion is people use the phrase like for like or like kind.
Yeah, like they'll think I need a quadplex for a quadplex. And I'm
Yes.
like, no,
It's
no.
just business or investment property for business or investment property. So you can do anything within that realm. So that's a big point of confusion. Then going back to the debt aspect, where people get confused is kind of two parts. One is they think they just have to place their equity, and then there's other people that will get confused about their basis. They'll think, oh, my cost basis is here, so everything up to that I can pull out. Anything above that I'll be taxed on. So they're like, oh, well, my cost basis, is let's call it, my cost basis is 400 in this property, and I'm selling for 5. So I can pull out up to 400. But I have to explain to them, and sometimes I get really frustrated, but it's like, it's the opposite.
And just because you want it to be true does not mean it is true, by the way.
Yeah,
That's what I tell people all the time.
Sometimes people get
they're like,
really
"No, but
frustrated
I
with me, and I'm
know
like,
it's
hey,
this way.
it's just this way, and I'm sorry.
And I'm like, no, it's not us making that decision.
Yeah.
You know?
So basis, you can essentially, if you're going to do a fully deferred exchange, your cost basis is more or less moot. It's always good to know kind of where you're at. And usually only cost basis comes into play if you're considering not exchanging or if you're considering a partial exchange, then it becomes more important. But sometimes people come in thinking, hey, my basis is this, so I can pull this out. The first thing to dispel is if you pull cash out, you're going to be taxed, period. Doesn't matter what your basis is. Well, it does. I mean, if you have gain, if you pull cash out, you're going to be taxed on it, essentially.
Yeah, people don't like that answer.
They don't like the answer.
Yeah.
But you need to buy equal or greater. So this aspect, we call it debt replacement. So in going back to the example of 500 sales price, 250 equity, 250 a debt, they need what we call 250,000 of debt replacement is what we call it. And so a lot of times this takes multiple conversations for people to like really stick because it's just a weird concept. But that's the biggest thing to remember aside from kind of the basics of like kind, your 45-day, 180-day is this idea of debt replacement. And sometimes people get really frustrated. And if you really want to understand why that is, I just explain to them a simple scenario because they're like, well, how does that make sense? I'm paying tax on money I don't even have. That's debt, et cetera. It's like, well, think about it this way. Let's say you had a property for 500,000 and then you put a mortgage on it for 400. You pull that money out, tax deferred, tax free, people would call it, right? You pull that out, 400,000. You don't pay any tax on that money, right? And you have 100,000 of equity left in that property. Well, now if you sell under your premise,
good point.
You pulled all that money out. Now you only got to exchange 100. You got 400,000 out.
You still have the 400
tax free,
right?
Even though it's tax deferred because of this very principle. Because when you sell, it's only tax deferred because you have 100 in there. You're selling for 5. You got to replace the 5 still, right? And that's why that money that you're pulling out from, refinance or whatever is tax deferred. People like to say tax free. It's easier to say tax free money, but just know that it's not tax free.
Yeah, I was going to say, here's the thing. Bottom line, the government knows.
Yeah, and they want your money.
They want your money, and there's no like unicorn, rainbow, like magic wand. So, again, there's amazing gifts, is what I tell people. I'm like, these are gifts, like REITs, DSTs, TICs. These are all great options. So they've come about as great options. But again, anytime somebody's just like, well, I'm just going to take that money and just pocket it, and
you can do that X, Y, just as long as you know that it's deferred and you got to exchange, all that stuff.